Latin Americans are shaping their own future. They are writing their own story. They hold a pen. As I see it, our role is to read those words, take them in, and help however we can as Latin America writes its own next chapter. The membership of the Council of the Americas includes so many leaders who are truly committed to strengthening economies and democracies throughout the Western Hemisphere.
It's always great to interact with the government officials that the council is able to gather together to hear their take on what they need industry to be doing in their countries. I mean, especially over the past year when we've all been unable to travel like we would previously.
It is really a great avenue to get your issues to people who are actually the decision makers, public and private sector.
It's great to be back at the Washington Conference on the Americas. It's been one of the most dependable, value-added events in Washington.
The Council of the Americas and its members share a common commitment to economic and social development, open markets, the rule of law, and democracy throughout the hemisphere. These are the conditions that allow business to thrive and societies to prosper.
You do so much to advance our common values throughout this hemisphere. And I want to thank you for your tireless efforts to educate about our hemisphere and to push for our common interests.
It was always about what can we do for Latin America? What can we do for the Americas? It's no longer that. It's what can we do with Latin America?
For almost 60 years, the Council of the Americas has been the top organization focused on the Western Hemisphere with a business focus. We don't just lead the conversations, we actually help create the conversations around the Western Hemisphere.
People come to this country and they grab the bottom rung and they move up the ladder and they succeed.
Our democracies have to be more efficient and they have to deliver results. And at the same time, we have to be able to confront these authoritarian practices.
Delivering growth with equity also demands tapping into one of the most powerful engines for opportunity in the Americas, the private sector.
We need the collaboration of private sector and government and civil society to be able to not only address all the challenges of the region, but also tap into the opportunities.
The private sector has a unique voice around the Western Hemisphere, particularly now when there's an active conversation about whether state-led growth or private sector-led growth is the more appropriate way to get out of COVID and to get to economic recovery. This is a conversation that the private sector absolutely has to not just be part of, but has to be leading.
We all seek in America a hemisphere that is not just secure and prosperous, but that is democratic. Ultimately, we are putting our faith in the people of this hemisphere.
We seek an Americas that is not just secure and prosperous, but also democratic. And our faith is in the people of the Western Hemisphere. Ladies and gentlemen, the comments of the former Vice President of the United States, now President Joe Biden, speaking at the Washington Conference on the Americas in 2013, and a perfect way to frame our 52nd Washington Conference this year. Consider, as we head to the next Summit of the Americas just 4 weeks from today, the hemisphere is facing some headwinds on challenges arising from Russia's brutal assault on Ukraine, on economic recovery from the pandemic, even as the president notes today that the United States has passed the tragic 1 million deaths threshold, on the challenges of crime and security and gangs, on governance and democratic resiliency, on migration, on energy transition and global climate change. And yet there is nothing that we cannot do in the hemisphere if we do it together, with willing partners sharing values, pursuing a common agenda. This is how we get to a sustainable, resilient, and more equitable future, which is the theme of our conference today. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Farnsworth, the Vice President and Washington Office Head of the Council of the Americas, and I'm very pleased on behalf of the Council to welcome all of you. We have a terrific program for you today with amazing speakers, panels, and even a few surprises. With the Biden administration now in office for well over a year and the summit on the near horizon, now is a crucial time to take stock of where we are and where we're going. Thank you for agreeing to spend some of your time with us to explore these questions today. A few quick program notes. After initial comments from our co-host, the Assistant Secretary of State, Brian Nichols, we will feature a discussion with the Deputy U.S. Trade Representative, Jamie White. We'll follow that with comments from the CEO of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, Scott Nathan. I'll then interview Ben Sasse, a leader in the Senate and a very important voice on trade. Next, we'll hear from World Bank President David Malpass, a real friend of the Council, and he'll be followed by keynote remarks from the Department of Homeland Security. A top-level panel on the energy transition in the Americas will conclude our very full agenda today. As always, we encourage you to join in the conversation. Our handle is @ASCOA, and our hashtag is 2022WCA. Let's get these topics trending. Throughout the day, we'll also bring you specially produced and curated musical interludes featuring the highly regarded cultural activities of the Americas Society, some of which you've already heard just a few minutes ago. These will be paired with important messages from our conference sponsors who remain unwavering in their support, and I'm betting that at least one of the videos will make you burst out laughing. Let us know what you think. Our work would simply not be possible without them. And so let me thank and acknowledge our presenting platinum sponsors this year: the AES Corporation, Amazon, Chevron, and General Motors. Our gold sponsors are the BMW Group, Chiquita, Freeport-McMoRan, Integra Capital, Merck, which is MSD outside the United States, MetLife, the Principal Financial Group, Repsol, Shell, and Walmart. And our music sponsor is iShares by BlackRock. Please join me in virtually thanking each of these companies for their generosity and their partnership in bringing to you for over 50 years the Washington Conference on the Americas. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an amazing agenda and much to discuss, so let's get to it. To offer her own greetings and to introduce our first speaker, please welcome the President of the Council of the Americas, Susan Siegel. Susan.
Thank you, Eric. And I unmuted myself, wasn't it? Okay. Thank you, Eric. And good afternoon to our members and to all of those tuning in around the hemisphere and around the globe. After hearing from the Secretary of State and OAS Secretary General last week at the State Department, I am really looking forward to this virtual session of our 52nd Annual Washington Conference on the Americas. Before we begin, I want to thank Eric, Steve, and the entire Washington team, as well as Guillermo and Luisa and our broadcast team for making this happen. For over half a century now, we have been holding this conference, and a lot has changed. The virtual session we are holding today would have been difficult 5 years ago, but it was unthinkable 50 years ago. In all that time, though, one thing has not changed. Our co-host, once again, the Council of the Americas, is pleased to welcome the Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs as our partner for the Washington Conference on the Americas. It is no small part thanks to our long and very important partnership with WHA, as the Bureau is known inside the Beltway, that this conference offers the consistent senior level analysis that our members and friends throughout the hemisphere and now around the globe have come to expect. This year, it's a particular honor to be working with Assistant Secretary Brian Nichols, one of the most distinguished U.S. diplomats at a global level, a true expert on U.S. relations with Latin America, and most importantly, a great friend and longtime supporter of the Council of the Americas. Ambassador Nichols has been Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs since September of last year, taking on what I think is one of the most important and demanding jobs in Washington, as he manages relations not just with 34 countries, but with our two North American neighbors, whose actions impact millions of Americans every day. Prior to being named Assistant Secretary, Ambassador Nichols served as U.S. Ambassador to Zimbabwe, as well as Ambassador to Peru, and as Deputy Chief of Mission in Colombia. Previously, he also served in Mexico, El Salvador, and Indonesia. Here in Washington, he has also served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, and as Director of the Office of Caribbean Affairs. It is a real pleasure for me to welcome Brian to our virtual session today. Following an amazing in-person event he joined for us for last week in the State Department's diplomatic reception rooms. Having him with us again gives me a second opportunity to recognize all that he and his team do on behalf of U.S. relations with the Western Hemisphere. Assistant Secretary Nichols, Brian, thank you for your consistent support of the Council and our members. Thank you for your career of service to our nation, and thank you for being with us today. I pass the floor to you.
Susan, thank you for that generous introduction. And your friendship, leadership, and guidance is invaluable to our team here in the State Department. And Eric, thank you so much for your leadership on the Washington side of the Council's work. It's not lost on any of us that you were there at the creation of the summit process, and we look to you for advice as we prepare for another summit. And on behalf of my colleagues in the department and the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, I'm enormously delighted to join you again for the 52nd Washington Conference of the Americas. We have built a long-standing collaboration with the Council on the Washington Conference around our shared values. The Council remains a steadfast champion of democracy, inclusive development, economic growth, and the rule of law. The Council's goals align closely with our own. This year's Washington Conference theme, as Eric said, towards a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future, reflects our shared aspirations for the hemisphere and echoes the theme of the 9th Summit of the Americas, which the United States will host in Los Angeles in June. The summit will provide a historic opportunity for us to come together with our allies and partners to reaffirm our commitment to our shared values and advance a concrete agenda to help democracies deliver for our citizens. The summit will address the COVID-19 pandemic and the cracks it has exposed in our health, education, and social services throughout our hemisphere. The climate crisis, the lack of equitable access to economic opportunities, and of course, threats to democracy. Western Hemisphere leaders have placed strengthening democracy at the center of their efforts to improve the lives of the people of our hemisphere since the first Summit of the Americas in Miami in 1994. Each summit has reaffirmed our shared dedication to democracy, including when our leaders directed the creation of the Inter-American Democratic Charter at the 3rd Summit in Quebec City in 2001. In Quebec City, the region's leaders upheld the strict respect for democracy as an essential condition for participation in all future summits. Since then, any unconstitutional or alteration or interruption of the summit democratic order has presented an obstacle to summit participation. Democracy is vital not only to governments and leaders, but to our citizens around the world and in our hemisphere in particular. We must ensure that our citizens' faith in democracy is both warranted and rewarded. As the Secretary of State said, we can't take the democratic charter of this region for granted. It depends fundamentally on people's continued belief that they can improve the system from within. We have to show people that democracies can do better, that they can deliver what people want and what people need. To sustain support for democracy, we must address the gap between our words and deeds, between rhetoric and reality, between what our democracies have promised and delivered. The leaders who gather at the summit have the opportunity and the obligation to commit to concrete actions to build better lives for the people of our hemisphere at a very challenging time for the region. COVID-19 has taken the lives of over 2.7 million people in our hemisphere. That accounts for more than 40% of global reported deaths. It represents the highest per capita loss of any region in the world. The pandemic has inflicted economic harm throughout the region and exacerbated long-standing challenges of lack of economic opportunity and inequity. In addition to the pandemic, an accelerating climate crisis, violence and insecurity, corruption, declining trust in government all contribute to historic migration flows across the Americas as part of a larger global migration crisis that has over 94 million people around the world on the move. To confront these challenges, the summit must focus on building strong and inclusive democracies, bolstering our pandemic response, health systems, and resilience, fostering a green and equitable recovery, and addressing the root causes of migration. We will build on the principles enshrined in the Inter-American Democratic Charter and the commitments made at the 8th Summit in Lima and the December 2021 Summit for Democracy, in which 27 countries in our hemisphere participated. We will work with leaders throughout the hemisphere, incorporating the recommendations of diverse voices to support democracy, transparency, and good governance. As the Secretary noted, of all the forces driving democratic progress in the Americas since 1994, none, in my judgment, has been more critical than the region's vibrant, diverse, and growing civil society. We have long supported the constructive participation of stakeholders in the summit process and plan to increase that engagement in Los Angeles, ensuring that civil society groups, leaders from the private sector, and our young people engage directly and substantively with governments. We will invest approximately $75 million across 300 community-led organizations in the Americas through Inter-American Foundation programs to empower and build capacity of local civil society organizations. The 9th Summit will support the implementation of our commitments to democracy and transparency, including free and fair elections, citizen participation, protection of human rights defenders, journalists, workers, women and girls, and members of vulnerable and marginalized groups, anti-corruption, and strong and transparent regulatory practices. The summit will address COVID-19's impact so that together we can implement the lessons that we have learned and improve pandemic response and resilience across the hemisphere. Following the summit, we will establish an Inter-American Plan of Action to strengthen the capacity and resilience of health systems and pandemic preparedness. We propose leaders take a whole of government approach to address systemic issues and promote an inclusive regional recovery that considers the special challenges faced by vulnerable and marginalized communities. We look forward to coordinating with heads of state, youth, civil society, and business leaders to build more resistant health systems and pandemic response mechanisms for citizens across the hemisphere, and especially for the region's most vulnerable populations. We are working with countries throughout the hemisphere to combat vaccine hesitancy with the goal of achieving a 70% vaccination status in selected countries. To date, the United States has donated over 67 million vaccine doses to 30 countries in the Western Hemisphere. Our collective future depends on our ability to foster an equitable and green pandemic recovery. Confronting the climate crisis means investing in our future by developing sustainable and accessible infrastructure, accelerating the clean energy transition, and creating new economic opportunities. The political will to accelerate climate action exists in the Americas. We saw it in Glasgow at COP26, where Latin American and Caribbean countries came out in force to support the global methane pledge, commit to end deforestation, and announce plans to accelerate decarbonization of the electricity sector. Together, we can lead with the power of our example. The Western Hemisphere holds tremendous clean energy potential that can serve as a driver for economic development and help address the climate crisis that threatens livelihoods throughout the hemisphere. By adopting and sharing best practices and working closely with multilateral development banks and the private sector, we can accelerate the creation of sustainable clean energy infrastructure that meets the needs of all our citizens. The United States sees digital ecosystem development as one of our most fundamental and cross-cutting shared priorities with the hemisphere. Building these ecosystems means bringing together stakeholders, regulatory and policy systems, and technologies to create an enabling environment that benefits people's everyday lives. When it comes to digitization of the Western Hemisphere, we all share similar goals, including providing digital tools and internet across access to rural communities, protecting citizens' data from misuse, and promoting an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable internet. Inequality remains pervasive throughout our hemisphere, and the economic and social effects of the COVID-19 pandemic have made those divisions more acute. For many, the lack of affordable, readily accessible internet connections limits employment opportunities, restricts their access to information they need to thrive, and cuts them off from participating in critical parts of the economy like e-commerce. Our shared future is digital, and our ability as a region to compete and succeed increasingly depends on defining a shared vision for how we foster digital ecosystems that connect people and improve their lives. This summit offers a unique moment to put forth a compelling vision as a hemisphere for how we can use technology in a way that serves our citizens, promotes opportunity and inclusion, protects our privacy, and reinforces our highest democratic values. Together, we will respond to this challenge and seize this opportunity at the summit by adopting a statement of shared principles to guide how we will work with stakeholders to drive digital transformation. Implementing these concrete actions can enable increased innovation, equity, access, inclusion, government transparency, and ease of doing business for all. Safe, orderly, and humane migration remains a shared responsibility, and our summit commitments will address the root causes of irregular migration. We are working with partners across the region to develop and adopt a declaration on migration and protection at the Summit of the Americas. We intend to highlight joint action on migration and protection, such as enshrining comprehensive regional commitments to humane enforcement of immigration laws and safe legal pathways for migration. We must create better mechanisms to manage regional migration now, as we continue the longer-term work of addressing its root causes. Our efforts to support economic growth through our hemisphere and to engage the private sector are vital for the future of our region and our place in the world. We're looking for comprehensive solutions to the many challenges that average men, women, and children in our hemisphere face. Your role as the private sector, and particularly the members of the council, is vital. And I hope that we can work with you comprehensively to address these challenges. We look forward to hearing more of your ideas and to stand with you to achieve a shared vision for the Americas, working together to help lay the foundation for a green and equitable pandemic recovery, build strong and inclusive democracies that deliver good, high-paying, quality jobs, that promote private sector-led growth, and show the future of our hemisphere will be even brighter. As Secretary Blinken said, focusing on what unites us as democracies rather than what divides us, ensuring not only growth but greater equity, deepening regional resiliency in the face of shared challenges, and standing together and addressing autocracy and democratic backsliding alike. We will not only strengthen our individual democracies, we will do better at what is our number one responsibility, and that is delivering on the fundamental needs and the fundamental hopes of all the peoples in this hemisphere that we share. Thank you for your steadfast partnership and support.
Ryan, that was terrific. Thank you very, very much for those great comments. Thank you for your shout out as well, and for your friendship, both personally, but also with the council indeed. We'll see you in Los Angeles, and best wishes for a really successful summit. Up next, after a short interlude, our trade conversation with Deputy U.S. Trade Representative Jamie White. Stay with us.